Be confident, be bold, be authentic, but don't forget to take action. This is Ordinary to Badass, where our stories empower women to step into the spotlight of their own lives and pursue what they're truly passionate about. It's time to step into the arena and become more than just extraordinary. It's time to become a badass with your host, Marie Sonneman.
Welcome to Ordinary to Badass, episode number 227. In this episode, you're going to hear from Marie Alessi. Marie unexpectedly lost her husband, and he was a father of two boys in 2018 to a brain aneurysm. So she talks about her own tools and intuition that she found, and she created her way back to happiness. So she talks about loving life after loss. This episode is so good. If you've ever lost a loved one, or you know somebody that's lost a loved one, then I would definitely recommend this episode, because we all grieve differently. And sometimes it's just about finding tips and tricks that will help us get through the day, right? After you lose somebody, it is stinking hard. And so if you can take one thing that Marie said and be able to apply it to your life and help you heal just a little bit, or find a little bit of joy after something horrific or horrible happens. When you lose a loved one, it can be absolutely life-changing. So definitely listen to this episode. And again, I would love it if you shared it. If you know somebody who's lost a loved one, you can usually share it by clicking the three dots at the top right corner of your episode. So whatever your podcast platform is, if you're in the episode looking at like the episode notes there, then just click the top three dots and there should be an option to share the episode. All right, with that, let's get to it. Welcome to Ordinary to Badass. Whether you're ordinary or badass, I am so glad you're here. Today's guest is Marie Alessi. Marie, thank you so much for being here. Excited to have you on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
So before we go any further, I've got to ask you, do you consider yourself ordinary or badass?
Completely ordinary. Just kidding. Badass, of course. Otherwise I wouldn't be here.
So have you always felt like a badass?
No, I don't think so. I think growing up, I felt rather normal. I don't know, just very, growing up in a family of five, and, I just felt like quite mainstream. And within myself, I always felt I was different, but badass, that is a title I would have not dared to own in younger years. But now I'm rocking it.
So was there like one instance that like really stands out that made you feel like a badass, or was it a series of instances over time?
It was definitely a series of instances. It was like a growing into something that was already written all over myself, but I didn't dare to own it. That's how I would describe it. Yeah.
I love that. You said growing into something.
That was already written all over me.
Yes, I love that. So good.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
So before we go any further, will you tell us a little bit about yourselves?
Sure. How many hours have we got? No, just kidding. So I'll give you the nutshell version, because I'm sure you'll ask me more details where you want to know more. So I'll give you the bullet point style of who I am and my background. I was born in Austria, grew up in Germany, back to Austria, then moved to Australia in 2004. I had a really, really strong calling that I was meant to live here. And people never really understand why. It doesn't make sense to them. But it just felt like this was my home. And because I have moved around so often, I didn't really know that feeling of home very well, because I constantly started from scratch, new schools, new friends, sometimes new country. And then having this calling to come here and live here and feeling like this is my home was a very bizarre concept for me, because I'm like, home, what does that mean? Then in 97, I flew to Australia for the very first time. And that's when that feeling of home really infused me. I was like, wow, this is where I belong, This feeling of belonging was really, really important to me. So I it took me about 7 years to finally make it happen, but I did make it happen and moved here for good in 2004. It was my 12th visit actually in those 7 years, so I just knew I had to be here. Finally had everything sorted. You know, I got my working visa, I got my job, I got my motorbike and my place to live. And 10 months later, I met Rob. And if anybody would have told me, you're going to get married to a guy that you meet 10 months after you move there, and you'll be married 10 months later, I'm like, no way. This is, you know, if he's Mr. Right, he'll still be Mr. Right in 3 to 5 years. But when he popped the question 5 months after going out, I was like, of course. It was no doubt. It was no doubt. And it was not just I'm so in love sort of feeling. It was a very deep feeling that he's the one. And people always say that, if you know, you know. And I thought, what is that for a weird thing? If you know, you know. You know, it just felt very strange to me. And when I met Rob, I knew. And I'm like, that's what they're talking about. And that never changed. Like, Rob and I got married 10 months after we met. And that feeling of knowing never changed. I always knew that him and I, that was just such a meant to be, you know. And then 2 years after we had our first son, Flynn, and another 2 years after our second son, Jed, and that completed our family. And it also made me leave the advertising world. I was in advertising for 10 years. I stepped out of this world, stayed home for a couple of years to just be a mom. I should skip the word just, to be a mom. And then stumbled into the self-development world. So I started a new business. I started my own business called News Coaching, and I work predominantly with mindset. So I taught people tools to shift their mindset, shift their perspective. And I did that for about 7.5 years, focusing mainly on business owners. And the caliber of the business owners was rising with my business, basically. And 7.5 years into it, Rob went on a business trip and never came home. He just had a brain aneurysm on a business trip away, 5 hours flight away, and died in the prime of his life at the age of 45. He was super fit, super healthy, surfer, you know, there was nothing wrong. But he had a brain aneurysm, and that was the end of our family of 4 and the beginning of a story that was even bigger than the 4 of us. Yeah, that was the nutshell version.
So where do you go from there? You know, you find out that your husband passes away on a business trip. How do you pick yourself up after that?
I don't think I ever allowed myself to feel it fully drop. So I think that was the main thing. I felt like in the first moment, I felt the world stood still. Seriously, I felt like the world kept spinning on such a fast pace I couldn't catch up. And within me, everything was slow motion. But my brain was working a million miles an hour. It was such a bizarre concept of different speeds. You know, the world outside kept spinning normally. My brain kept spinning at triple speed, and everything else was completely slow motion. It was really bizarre. And it just hit me because it was so unexpected. And yet a tiny, tiny little part of me kind of knew it was something that was really hard to describe. But I felt strangely prepared for that moment and didn't even realize it was just something that came bit by bit after Rob's passing. And I think, or I know now, the worst thing I ever had to do in my entire life was telling the boys. They were only 8 and 10 at the time. So having to break those news to them was really, really heartbreaking and heart-piercing. It was just that the crying and the screaming, it was just something I was absolutely not prepared for. But I literally had 3 seconds to prepare myself to tell them when I was walking downstairs from my bedroom where I had received that phone call. So I shared the news with them. We hugged, we cried, we did everything that you can only imagine in that moment, you know. There were questions from my boys, and one of them was from my older son. He said, "Who's going to look after us now, Mum?" And I said, I will look after you, Flynn, you know. And it was just that moment. I didn't realize how important it was in that very moment that I said it out loud. It was like a promise that I had made. That was important for all 3 of us to hear me say it out loud, to make this promise. And that became the base for everything for me, you know, that whole I'm it now. I'm a sole parent. And interestingly enough, that sole parent didn't hit me till like 3.5 years after Rob passed. I always refer to myself as a single parent, but I'm not. Single parent, I've got another single parent somewhere, no matter how much or how little they're involved. But a sole parent, I've got nobody else. That's just them. It's just one parent, nobody else that they can share weekends with or anything. So that was really the moment where I just knew I wanted to do anything and everything I had in my heart, in my mind, in everything, in my whole being to create a happy life for them. I did not want them to be that the end of their road. I did not want them to be defined by, oh, that's the boys who lost their dad. I wanted them to grow up knowing how much they're loved and knowing about their dad, and also knowing that they can do anything and everything despite growing up with just one parent, and that defined my entire mindset, my entire choices, my being, my everything. And I remember, like, we had to fly to Perth the next day, which is 5 hours flights away from us, to identify Rob's body. We did that, the three of us together, because I just knew there was no way. Their dad just flew to the other side of Australia and didn't come back. There's no way I can do that on my own. I knew we needed to do this together. And then about 2 weeks after, we had the funeral. And at the funeral, I didn't just read a eulogy, I actually delivered a speech about love and connection and choices and happiness. And people were blown away by what I had to share. But to me, it was a love legacy for Rob that I shared there. It was everything that we were together, everything that Rob was about: family, love, connection. And it was important for me to share that message. And standing up there on stage in front of 500 people, it was just that intense feeling of, this is what I'm meant to do. I need to share a message. I need to share hope. So there were lots of little but really important moments along the journey that gave me this direction. It was like pointers on the way. There's a word for that. I forgot it. Anyway, it was like literally little pointers on the way, which path I had to choose. I felt guided from day dot. From the very first moment, I felt like really looked after. It was incredible.
So it seems like, and I mean, tell me if I'm wrong here, but it seems like you have this nudge or this intuition that has told you to do things in your life, like moving to Australia, or, like even when you gave that speech, just kind of the nudge, like, oh, this is what I'm meant to do. Is there anything that you do to hone that, like to get in touch with yourself, or to make sure, I don't know, I guess that allows you to have those nudges and those intuitions?
First of all, thank you. I never realized that, like seeing that from an outside perspective and hearing that like that is really beautiful, because I just realized how much longer I already had that gift without actually noticing it. But now that you say it, that's a huge gift for me to hear that. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was obviously there a lot longer, but I obviously did not do much about it at first. Hence, I only just realized it now that you say it back to me. But when these things became stronger and louder, there was no more ignoring them. So I think the real catalyst was Rob's passing. And that's when I really started to fully learn to trust my intuition, those nudges, those guidance signs, I would call them, like all these little signs that I've been given. That's when I really started to realize whenever I didn't trust that, something didn't feel right or went wrong completely, whatever. But learning just to listen to that inner voice was really incredible. And now it's such a second nature thing. Now it's just of course, well, I can't tell you why, I just have to do this, and just trusting that inner voice and learning to lean on that more and more was quite, intensely important for my journey, I'd say. Yeah.
Do you think that the more you lean on that, the easier it becomes?
Yeah, and the more it grows as well.
Yeah, and maybe it's a trust thing.
Yeah.
You learn to trust it because
Absolutely.
so far.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know you talked about family, love, connection, how that was so different from what other people had expected.
Yeah.
What do you say to families going through this now?
Oh, I think it's really interesting because my biggest advice is always like, listen to nobody else's advice. And that already is an advice. But it really is the trust your inner guidance as well. And often people say, like, I've got nothing. I'm empty. I'm this, I'm that. And I often talk about choices. You do have the choice to change this. And people are like, I can't change that my husband passed. And I'm like, of course not. But you can change how you respond to it. You can choose how you respond to it. And that's where our choice lies. And people say, like, I didn't choose for my husband to die, or my child, whoever that is in their lives who has passed. I didn't choose that. Well, there's two answers to that. I understand that everybody's got a very different faith and different beliefs. I've got, my strongest faith is that we actually did choose that. Rob and I had a soul contract, and that's the contract that we chose. To accept that when you then in your human form is really tricky sometimes. And that's why we are here. That's why we have this human experience, to grow through that, because that's what we have chosen to grow through together. And for me to realize how much love there actually was from Rob's end to choose that part in our story is incredible. It really blew me away. I was always blown away by Rob's love and how much he put me on a pedestal his entire life. He always raved about me. He really treated me like a queen. And that was the one thing I heard everywhere from a funeral. Rob raved about you. Rob always said, he never would shut up about you. And it's just really, really beautiful. But the intensity of our love just really, there was just so much more, even through his passing. And to have those realizations, what he actually did for me was incredible. And that also really pushed me, or pulled me, I should say, to do even more with that, to not fall apart and fall into self-pity. And this is with all due respect to anybody out there dealing with that. I'm not judging them for it. I understand how hard that is and how challenging it can be to pull yourself out. But trusting that there is a bigger plan, and open your heart and your mind to what I call the hidden gifts in adversity, is a choice that we have. And not everybody chooses to do that. But those who do are just so blessed, It's really incredible when we open our hearts to that and look at the gifts that we receive throughout somebody's passing. I believe that is a choice that people have made. And again, I understand that everybody's got a different belief, but that is mine. And that is just really a huge gift, I should say. Yeah.
So something I haven't talked about a lot on this podcast, my former stepdaughter took her life at 17. And so it was definitely, something that was super hard to cope with and to figure out how to navigate. I know one thing that helped me was setting aside time to grieve every single day. Like, okay, from 4 to 4:30, I can cry. Because you don't want to cry at work, or you don't want to cry certain places, but then you also don't want to forget your loved one. Was there anything that you did, or any tips that you have that helped you grieve, so that maybe it's something somebody else can consider?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, though, I want to say I think it's incredible, because one of my longest standing clients, she did the exact same. She set an hour per day aside after her husband died, but they had quite accumulated grief. They had 3 losses within 1 year in the family, and her husband obviously being her closest one. And she said she could not allow herself to fall apart. She had the kids to look after, and she set aside 1 hour a day as well. So first of all, I want to say, whatever works for you, really whatever works for you. And I'm not saying that in a sort of talking down way at all. It's whatever works for you, do that. Trust that. Trust your inner guidance. Trust your inner needs, what you have within you, that what you need. Trust that and do that, because you will see that society tries to push you into a cookie cutter approach of grief and how you're supposed to grieve. And that is usually for a widow. You're supposed to fall apart for at least a year, wear black. I mean, it's ironic because I'm wearing black today, but it's actually not my usual chosen color. And Yeah, I wore colors. I walked around and did whatever I felt was right for me. And for me, having my children was certainly an absolute bonus because I had them to guide, like for me to guide them, but also them to guide me. There was such a strong triangle to really trust the process, what they needed, what I needed. And very often what we needed was very different. You know, what one son needed was the complete opposite from what my other son needed, and then they swapped over, but it was never the same. So that was really challenging and tricky, but also a way to keep things open for different ways of dealing with it. The listening part is one of the biggest ones. So for anyone listening right now, if you're one that has got a close friend or relative around you that is just dealing with the loss, just listen to them. We are so inclined to offer advice, to offer help, to fix things. There's nothing we can fix. We need to trust the process. There is no fixing grief. There's just living through it. And for me, there are two ways of doing that. Society's way is to focus on the grief and do that as best as we can, as deeply as we can, with as much suffering as we can, and then we are fine, which is not true. My way of dealing with it is focusing on happiness, on healing, on where I want to be. And by me focusing on healing, what can I possibly do to heal? The grieving process happened along the way anyway. There is no stopping grief. There's probably a suppressing grief. I'm not sure if that really works well. It probably works on the outside, but still not on the inside. So I really believe there is no suppressing or stopping or pausing grief. There is just ignoring it, trying to ignore it. It always comes up anyway. Anything, any emotion that you try to ignore still comes up. So by me focusing on the healing process, what can I possibly do today or right now, just in a moment, to be a little bit happier, to focus on happening? And sometimes it's literally just take that one breath. Just listening to me right now, just take one breath with me. It instantly brings you back into the moment. And everything is calmer just with that one breath. You don't have to go and meditate for 15 minutes where you can't focus anyway. You don't have to go into a whole breathing technique. Just take one deep, deliberate breath. It's incredible what that does. Mm. So I just work with lots and lots of little tools in terms of what to focus on. And that really helped me. One game I often play, and I always share it with audiences when I get asked this, is I call it the color orange. So for an entire day, you focus on everything orange that you can find. And of course, if you don't like the color orange, choose it with any color that you like. I play it with orange because I like it. And you just focus on how many items can you find in one day when you focus on the color orange. You'd easily come up with 100 items. And then the next day, you replace the color with the emotion that you miss the most. That can be safety, that can be love. Love is a very generic one, so let's go with that. So the next day you focus on everything love that you see around you. That can be a child playing in the sun. That can be a cat purring. That can be a smile from a stranger. That can be anything. Love comes in so many different forms. It doesn't have to be intimate or romantic love. You know, it comes in so many shapes and variations. But when you focus on that, you do two different things. One thing is you deliberately focus on something that you want to see, and you distract your brain from the pain. So that's the two things that happen when you do that. And distracting doesn't mean ignoring it, but it means that you have choices. I'm always very big on choices. You have the choice to focus on whatever you want. And my husband was the one who taught me that. So I always say happiness is a choice. Healing is a choice. It's just something that we often don't realize when we're in the moment, because the grief can feel extremely heavy and dragging us down. So reminding ourselves that we do have choices is really important.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting how you said it doesn't mean distracting, because that was something I was going to ask you is, how do you advocate healing for yourself, for your kids, especially for your kids too, without feeling like you're just trying to distract them or cover it up and, you know, not experience the pain?
Yeah. Not at all. So I think the easiest way to explain that, and I also understand that not everybody has that, and that really feels like a gift to me as well, is that Rob and I had a couple of talks over the years, as you do when you're a parent. And I remember one time he came home and he had this most beautiful drive home through trees and flowers everywhere. I always said, "You've got the most beautiful drive to work and back." But there was just one road. So when there was an accident, the downside was there was no escaping this one route. So like you had to go down that one road. And he came home one day, like an hour or two later, and said there was this accident, blocked the entire thing, where they had to redirect traffic, and a little boy died. He was 4 years old. And another time, there was a dad who had a little kid who died. And when things like that happen, they really remind ourselves of the vulnerability of life. That things can happen at any given moment without us knowing beforehand. And some people know beforehand. They are given weeks, months, years to live, and others just like that, just like it happened with Rob. And he said to me, "If something was ever to happen to me, I want you to take the boys and live the happiest life ever." And I said the same to him, because I think that's what love is. Love is that simple. If you love someone, you want them to be happy. And that is such a key sentence. If you love someone, you want them to be happy. You don't want them to suffer. You don't want them to fall apart. And society often teaches us that the amount of love that we feel for one person has to be portrayed in the amount of grief that we put out into the world. And I don't agree with that. I really know for a fact that the amount of happiness I portray is exactly what Rob would want me to. That is what love is. I love him so much that I want him to see that we are happy, that I want us to be happy. And I know that he loves us so much that he wants us to be happy. And I want the boys to be happy. Everybody just, it's just where we are at. It is a choice. And I knew that that was Rob's choice. So if you're doubting that in any way and you don't know what your loved one who has passed would think, then I urge you to put yourself in his or her shoes. Really allow yourself to completely role swap, not stay in your role, in your mind, what you're thinking, but role swap into their being. You know them well enough to really role swap with them. And then from their perspective, look down on yourself and ask yourself, is that what your loved one would choose for you right now? And I think that is a really, really profound question to ask yourself.
So how did you foster these conversations with your kids?
I always kept it very open, but I always also focus on the listening part, as in, you've got one mouth and two ears, use it accordingly. That is a really, really great ground rule, in particular when it comes to kids. And when Rob first passed, my older one talked quite a bit about it. And my little one, his standard answer was, "I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it," all the time. And it broke me as a mom, in particular with what I do. I'm a coach, I'm a communicator, for me to not be able to talk to him about it, it broke me. But I really had to learn that. I really had to learn to just let him be and observe, just to observe, to gauge his emotions, gauge his state, and just be there to catch him when he was falling. And there were many times, I remember in particular the first 1 to 2 years, there were so many tears at night time with him because he didn't talk about it. So that was his only form of releasing it. He cried and cried and cried. And all I could do was hold him. And all I could do was to say, yes, it completely sucks. I get that. And so validating his emotions and listening to them rather than trying to tell him what he needs to feel, because who am I to tell him? Just because I'm his mom, he still needs to walk his own journey. It's just as unique as we are. Just because he was only 8 years old doesn't mean that he hasn't got his own path to walk through. And all I could do was hold space. And then after a while, it sort of swapped over. Jed started talking about it a lot, and Flynn completely shut down and didn't want to talk about it anymore. And I was like, I just wish that would happen at the same time so we can all talk about it and all not talk about it or whatever. But I really had to just gauge it day by day, and then week by week, and then month by month. And we did one session with a family bereavement counsellor, And that was the most beautiful thing. I'm still getting goosebumps now when I tell this, because Mary Beth was actually our God, blank moment, celebrant. She married us. So Rob and I had a barefoot wedding, a shaman wedding at the beach, which was really beautiful. And a couple of weeks after Rob passed, she reached out to me, because we stayed in contact over the years very loosely. And she reached out to me and said, I don't know if you actually know this, but I'm also a family bereavement counselor. And I was like, oh my God, I had no idea. And she was so beautiful. She was actually already retired, but she came down to see us. We're an hour south of Sydney, and she caught the train down, and she spent a couple of hours with us. And it was the most beautiful and highly emotional thing that we have done together after Rob's passing. I think probably the highly emotional part was actually identifying his body, but in terms of working through it, it was definitely that session, because what I didn't realize was that this very moment was the very first time I heard our story out of their perspective and not mine. And that was really beautiful, because she obviously asked them, and it was also beautiful that she told them that she knew their dad. And, it was such a sacred moment, and all three of us agreed afterwards. It was highly emotional, but so beautiful, and we were really glad that we did it. It was amazing.
Yeah, and I like how you somehow had the awareness to hold space for your kids and let them respond in how they wanted to respond, or grieve in their own way, because I think that is kind of a societal thing where we think people all should grieve the same way, or we should be able to give them feedback and give them the answers, but it doesn't always work that way.
Yeah, and also that whole approach, as in, you're a child, you just lost your dad, go to therapy. Therapy doesn't work for every child the same way, or not the same therapy works the same, so we have to stay open to our kids' needs, what they need, and our own as well. And it's tricky, I get that. The more souls that are involved, the more approaches you will need, and just to stay open and give it a go. If it doesn't work, try something else, really stay open to happiness as well. Often people don't allow that in. They don't allow happiness, joy, healing in, because they feel they're not supposed to or not allowed to. And I can tell you are. Absolutely, you are.
Yeah, and it's like, how many times are you happy or excited in a moment, and then all of a sudden you have like a terrifying thought, like of somebody dying or somebody getting in an accident or something horrible happening, because it's sometimes hard to be in that joy.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? The thing is, we experience so much joy and sadness and happiness. Like, we experience the entire palette of emotions every single day. But then all of a sudden, when somebody passes, for whatever reason, we think that now the happy side has to go. And I don't understand why. Because the sad part, or the heavier part, comes in automatically anyway. So why do we even have to foster that to make it even more? So I believe we need to do the complete polar opposite. And now that sadness is taking over and the heaviness is taking over, that's when we need to focus on happiness and joy even more so, to keep that balance, because life is always about balance. It's never only happy or only sad.
Right.
But for whatever reason, we all of a sudden think that now we're only supposed to be sad, and I don't agree with that.
So I know that you are starting a global movement. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So this happened step by step, actually. I saw a positive psychologist for about 4 months after Rob passed. She was incredible. I needed somebody to bounce off my whole emotions with, and expectations from society, etc. And I remember one day I had an epiphany sitting with her. I said, you know what, I think I need to write a book about this. The way I deal with it is so different, and what society expects is always like, they always look at me as like, oh, she's losing her marbles, or she is in denial, or she's still in shock, or whatever, in the early stages. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I feel fully aware of where I am and where I'm going with this. It doesn't mean that I didn't have moments where it felt completely surreal, but I was fully aware of what was going on. And I was fully aware of the choices I made. So I decided I'm going to write a book about it. And it was predominantly meant as a love legacy for Rob, but also in terms of sharing hope with others, that there is a different way how you can deal with that. So it was like a download writing that book. I wrote and edited and published the book within 4 weeks. And the book is called Loving Life After Loss. And that is basically our story and how we dealt with it, And then after that, I traveled around the world with the boys for 2 months. And while I was traveling, I had this next epiphany where I thought, this is so much bigger than me. The book not only became an Amazon #1 bestseller, but it also ranked in the top 100 of Australia. And I was blown away. I didn't expect that. I was just sharing a story, and I'm like, I need to do something with that. And then I remember the mentor that I'd been on his newsletter list for a couple of years, and he's all about building movements, building tribes. So I reached out to him. I told him my story in a nutshell. And when we came back from our trip around the world, 2 weeks later, I sat in his first workshop and recorded my welcome video for the group. And then another week later, I opened a group. It's about 3 years back now that we're talking. And within weeks, I had hundreds of people come in, and now we're up to 3,500 people. And these people just keep coming in. Every time there's something written about us or a podcast like you're listening to it now, people start looking for the group, and it's got the same title, Loving Life After Loss. I thought the title is so perfect. I kept that for the group as well. Then I started, creating healing journeys for people, sharing those tools, how they can use them, healing programs, and then healing retreats. That was my absolute highlight. So twice a year now I run a retreat, and then every couple of months we run programs. And there's also a free healing journey in our group for those who really don't have the financial needs. I absolutely want to cater for everyone and not make that dependent on whether you do or don't have the income to come to a retreat. I understand that not everybody can afford that, but I wanted to have something there for everyone. And the group in particular, there's just so much love and support. I've got a couple of moderators and group experts in there that all help me moderate the group, support people that come in. And it is just very different to most grief support groups find out there, because our focus is on healing and not on the, whose loss is more tragic or more recent or more. It often turns into a bit of a competition when you look into various support groups. But in our group, there's none of that. There's really just focus on love and support and healing. And and then this February, I used this beautiful portal, the 222 portal. On the 2nd of the 2nd, I released my second book, which was Happy Healing. And Happy Healing is literally the continuum of our story, what happened after I published the first book. I talk about the global movement and how that grew and what we do in there. And I also share very hands-on healing tools like the game, The Color Orange, and quite a few others, just how to cope with it. For those who are in a complete beginning stages and don't even know where to start, Happy Healing is a really great beginning, because you find all the hands-on tools in there as well. And the very latest one that I'm super happy, and that really blew me away, because it was a big goal of mine that I had, where I said, when I stood on stage and held Rob's eulogy, I had this epiphany, I need to do that. I recently had the absolute honor to do a TEDx talk, and the TEDx talk was redefining our image of the widow. So you'll find that on TEDx and on YouTube as well. And that's what I'm doing. That's what I grew out of all of that. So it's quite incredible how that happened.
No, I love the work that you're doing. I think it's so important, and I just want to honor you for doing it, because life after death.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think life after death is kind of a turning point for people. You can either kind of go down and carry that baggage forever, and it just gets heavier.
Absolutely.
And heavier, or you can use it to kind of propel you forward. So thank you for doing the work you're doing.
It's a choice, isn't it?
It is. It is. So let's end with a tip to encourage women who are in the arena fighting for the life that they want.
Oh, wow. Okay. I think the most important part is, I believe that we as human beings, in particular women, I shouldn't say that, but I am, are highly intuitive. We really are. And often we don't realize how intuitive we are. So when you really think about it, I think the simplest trick is to allow yourself to sit in stillness and to just listen. And everything is already up there. I work with a coach. We often call it connecting with the higher self. And you can do that at any given stage. Just allow yourself to let this higher self speak and listen to that. I think that's my biggest advice, because whatever your adversity you're going through right now, it feels in a moment like it's so much bigger than you. And sometimes it is in the most positive way. Like, when I created this movement, this was so much bigger than us, but not bigger than me as in it's drowning me, it's crushing me. it really elevated me. It empowered me to step up and do something and share the message. And I think that a lot of you out there listening to this right now have got something incredible, yet you might not have found your platform yet how to share that. And I just want to encourage you to listen to that inner voice and to act upon it.
So good. How can we connect with you and find out more about you and your books and all that?
I think the easiest way is my first name, last name.com. So it's mariealessi.com is my website. And you find everything on there. The link to my TEDx talk, to my programs, to my books, to book a chat with me. If you just want to reach out to me directly and just have a chat, I encourage you to do that. You know, I offer like little slots for people to just come in and have a conversation. I'm more than happy to nudge them in the right direction. And that's not always just me. There's so much more out there, you know, like just because people come to me or come into my movement doesn't mean that I've got all the answers for them, but I can often direct them to somebody else who does. So I'm always open to just listen to people and trust my intuition, whatever comes up when I talk to them, and nudge them in the right direction.
Marie, thank you so much. You've been a total badass and I've enjoyed hearing your story.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed that. Thank you.
And with that, we'll end our show. To all the badass women out there staying in the arena, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, own it and get after it.
Now that you've listened to this episode of Ordinary to Badass, we want to hear from you. Go to our website, ordinarytobadass.com/podcast, and submit your own experience on how you took your life from ordinary to badass and get the chance to be on a future Spotlight episode of the show. That's ordinarytobadass.com/podcast. While you're waiting for the next episode of the show, wipe off the sweat, dust off the dirt, and get back in the arena.